What's up guys, Andre here, and today I'd like to do a comparison between Vue and React. There are a good amount of comparison videos out there, but most of them are at a high level, just giving a general overview of both frameworks. I'd like to dive deeper and look at actual code of how to accomplish the same thing on both frameworks. Now, I understand that there are several ways of doing things, but I'm going to stick with the most common way of doing things in each respective framework. At least what I think is the most common way. So we'll take a look at Vue first, then we'll take a look at the same thing in React. So since I'm doing it this way, I'm going to assume you have at least some knowledge of Vue. And I think most of my audience is more familiar with Vue than React, so we'll stick with this way. So I have an app scaffolded out using both frameworks CLIs. So here is the Vue one here, using the Vue CLI. And I'm going to be switching to the React one here. And here is the React one. I haven't changed anything, so we'll just be starting from scratch and switching back between both of them. So let's go ahead and start with Vue. So if you use Vue, you're probably using single file components, which in my opinion is one of Vue's best features. Everything that has to do with the component is in the same file, separated by template for your markup, script for your JavaScript, and style for your CSS. So if you take a look at the structure here, we have our main entry point, so our main JS here, and this is mounting to a div with an ID of app, which is in this static HTML file right here. So everything gets mounted inside of this element. And also the root component is this app component right here. And this one renders out a child component called Hello World, which is in this components folder. And here's the code for that, which outputs what you see here. So in React, here's the app scaffolded out using the CLI. So similarly to Vue, index.js is our entry point, and it's mounting itself to a element of root. And that static HTML file is in here. So root is right here. And also it is also mounting itself or using this app component, which is here. Just so the comparison is almost the same, in Vue there is a child component. So let's go ahead and make a child component for the React one. So it's going to make a new folder called components. And we'll make one in there called child. Actually, let's make it hello world, so it's the same as Vue. So hello world dot, and in React it's just JS files using JavaScript classes. So let's go ahead and copy this, and let's just put that in here. And we don't need this stuff. Let's call this hello world. And let's go ahead and save that, and let's use it in our main component here. We have to import it, so import hello world from components hello world, and we can go ahead, we'll just put it under here. Call it hello world, and let's self-close it, save that. Sorry, let's take this logo up. Oh, sorry, let's just change this to a div, and let's just say hello world. Okay, so now our structure is the same in both apps. So like I said, in React, we just have plain JavaScript classes for our components. So for each component, we have a class, and then we export that class so we can use it in other components. So in a way, you can think of components in React as the template and the script part in Vue single file components. Also in React, we make use of JSX, which is a mix of markup and JavaScript. Some people love it, some people hate it, but you'll be spending a lot of time in JSX land if you're using React. You can also use JSX in Vue and render functions in Vue if you like. Okay, let's start with CSS, and we'll start with Vue here. So Vue single file components have this style tag where you can utilize CSS. Now, if you don't add the scoped attribute here, then this CSS is global to your entire app, and every component can make use of this. So you can see in this case, it is global. However, if you add the scoped attribute, like in this child component, I think it's scope, yep, then this CSS only applies to everything in this component. Let me just make this wrapped for a sec. Cool. And I really like this because it limits your CSS on a component basis. You can also use Sass if you like. So right here, if you want to use Sass, you have to install some node packages. I think you have to install like Sass Loader and Node Sass. But after you have that installed, you'll just do lang equals scss. And then in here, you can make use of anything you can make use of in Sass, which is pretty awesome and easy to install. Now, if you want to use external CSS, you can import it like this. So let's go ahead and make a CSS file. So I'm just going to name it, put in this assets folder, testing.css. And let's do .red, color red. Save that. And if you want to import that, you can just import it like this. Actually, there are a few ways to import it. I'll show you both ways. Actually, it's probably more than two, but so the first way is just to import it here in our JavaScript. So import, I think we have to go up one. I think I put in the assets folder and call it testing.css. And let's go ahead and put something here at the end. div.red testing 1, 2, 3. And there you go. You see that it works over here. So the other way to import it is just to import it in your CSS. So it would look like something like this. So import, actually let me just grab this whole thing. It's the same thing, except we're using the CSS way of importing it. And this should work as well. Sorry, I need a semicolon here. And that should work. There you go. It worked after a hard refresh. Okay. So in React, there are several ways we can use CSS. The first way is just the traditional way using CSS, but we import it using this import syntax. So the CSS file here is this app CSS, and you can do whatever you like here, and that should be reflected. So for example, if I comment this out, this animation should stop. And it does, cool. So another way to do CSS in React is using CSS in JS. So if you haven't used CSS in JS before, it's exactly how it sounds. So you would define CSS using JavaScript syntax, specifically a JavaScript object. So let's go ahead and try that out. So let me just make another p tag here. And testing 1, 2, 3. And to do CSS in JS, one way would be to do it inline. So you would do style, and then curly is the JavaScript you want to run, and we want to make it an object. And here is where we define our JavaScript. So we have to make sure we use camel case here. So let's change the color. We want that to be red. And let's say the background is light gray. Let's try on wrapping again. Not sure. I thought I did that already. Okay, save that. And there you go. You see the CSS change. So another way to do the same thing is just to save that style as a variable. So up here, we can do const style equals the same thing. So let me just grab that, paste it in here, and that should work as well. Let me just change this. So now this would just be style like this. Save that. Sorry, this would be inside the render function before the return. So that should do it. Okay, so same result. And one more way of doing this is to specify this in an external file and then import that in here and then use that. So I'm just gonna comment this out, copy that. So that should go back to, okay, there's no style, but we will make a new file called style.js. Let's export default this, save that back here. Now we can import that. Import style from style, and then that should work. So there you go, it's working again. And you can even take it further and specify another object here. Let's call it red text. And we can just do like that. And then from within here, instead of style, we do style.red text. And there we go. So CSS in JS is used heavily in React Native because in React Native, you actually can't use class names and you can't use external CSS files. So another way to do CSS in React is using something called styled components, which is a very popular library. So if you Google it, so I personally haven't used this, but it's very popular in the React ecosystem. So I don't have an opinion on this because I haven't used it, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're into using CSS and React. Okay, let's talk about state and let's start with Vue. So in Vue, state gets defined in a data method where you return an object. So let's go ahead and do that here. So right here, we're going to make a data method and we are going to return an object. And this is where our state goes. So let's make a new one called message, not to be confused with this prop coming in called MSG. And let's just say I am state. And let's go ahead and just output that in our template up here. So I'm just going to put it up here. So right here. So for Vue to output it, you use this mustache-like syntax. And you don't have to specify this. You just have to specify what you called the state property. And there it is right there. Cool. If you refer to it in our script, then you have to use the this keyword. Vue doesn't force state to be immutable, unlike in React, so you can go ahead and mutate it directly if you like. So in React, state gets defined as an object in the constructor. So let me show you how to do that. So you would do constructor, and you have to take in the props. We'll take a look at props in a second. We have to call the parent method, parent constructor, and then here is where you define your state. So this dot state equals, and let's just do the same thing we did in Vue. I am state. And to output that, let's just go down here and do a p tag, and we would just do the single curly. And in React, you always have to refer to state using this keyword. So this dot message, and that should output it. Sorry, this dot state dot message. Okay, there it is. You can also specify the state by itself. So let me just cut this out. We don't need a constructor, and we can just do this, and then we can remove this keyword. I personally like this way since it's less code and it works the same. Cool. So for React, it takes a more functional approach and does not allow you to mutate state directly. When you want to update state, you have to call the setState function and pass in the state you want to change as an object. So here's an example, which we have to make use of methods and event handlers, which I'll get to in a second. But let me just make a button to demonstrate what I'm trying to say here. So button, let's call it change state. And we're going to make an event handler for clicking it. And when it's clicked, we want to run this function, the setState function. So this dot setState, and that takes an object, and we specified the thing we want to change. So we want to change the message. Let's just change it to state updated, and save that. And let's just click it to see if this updates. And it does. Cool. So that's how you change state using the setState method. Okay, now let's talk about methods and event handlers, and let's start in Vue. So in Vue, you define methods in a methods object. Let's go ahead and do that. So right here, I like to personally do it underneath data, but you can put it wherever you like. So it's an object, and this is where you specify your methods. So let's make one called sum method, and let's just update the message state that we have. So this message equals message changed. Okay, so now we have that method, but we need some way to invoke that method. So that's when we would use event handlers. So let's go ahead and make a button. So right underneath here, let's make a button. Let's say change state. See how it looks. So there's a button right there. So to invoke that method we just made, we can use something called directives. So we can use the vOn directive, and we can specify the event we want to listen for, in this case click, and then we want to give it the method we want to run. So in our case, it's that method we just made, and that should run that method. So this should change if we did this correctly, and there we go, message changed. The short form for vOn is just the @ symbol, which just makes it a bit shorter, and which is widely used in Vue. So there you go, it worked. There you go, so it works, cool. So if you want to pass in arguments, you can do that as well. So let's make another method called with argument. This is the argument. And let's go ahead and make another method. Some method with argument. It's passing the argument. And let's just set the message to the argument coming in. And that should work as well. Let's see. There you go, it works there. And one more thing I want to show, which I really like in Vue, is key modifiers and event modifiers, which just remove some of the tedious JavaScript when you write key modifiers. So let me show you an example. So back up here, let's make an input, and let's listen for the key up event, and let's run a key modifier method once we every time we type. So let's go ahead and make that. So key modifier, and let's just console log typed. So that should work. And let's open up the console here. And every time we type, you can see that gets invoked. But if we only want to listen for a certain key, usually you have to listen for the key code, you have to get that key code, and then you have to respond to that. But using this key modifier, all we have to do is add the key modifier here, here. And if you do .enter, and there's aliases for the most common keys, this will only listen for the enter key, which is very handy and very convenient. So if you save that, not sure why it's not refreshing. Now it won't get invoked until I press enter. So I pressed enter and there you go. You see it was invoked. So I really like that. So in React, methods are defined just like you would do in regular JavaScript. However, you should make use of the arrow syntax to bind the this keyword correctly. So let me show you what I mean. So just like we did in Vue, let's make a new method. Let's call it sum method. And instead of defining it like this, which you can, but like I said, this keyword won't be bound correctly if you do it this way. So usually for any custom method you write, you would have to use the arrow syntax like this. And arrow, and then like that. So let's do the same thing we did. So let's just copy what we have down here. So where I'm setting the state, right here, just copy this. And let me just put this on its own line. And for event handlers, you already saw me do this in the last demo. Let me just remove this. And we can just call this.sum method. And that should work the same way it did before. Did I name it correctly? Sorry, this should go out here, outside of the render function. My bad. Okay, so this should work like before, and it does, cool. So like I said, for event handlers, you would just use this on, and then you would specify the event here. So in our case, we're just using click. All right, let's make another method with an argument. So just like before, some method with argument. Now let's take in an argument. We don't need the brackets anymore since we're using the fat arrow syntax. And I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to set the state to that argument. And let's go ahead and some method with argument, and it's just hard code an argument. This is the argument. Okay, so let's save that. And you see we get this error of maximum update depth exceeded. So what's happening here is this method is being invoked right when the component renders. And we don't want that to happen. We only want it to render once this on-click event is listened for, or when it happens. So Vue is smart enough to know that you only want to invoke it when this event happens. But in React, we have to wrap this in an arrow function so it behaves correctly. So now if we do this, this should work. There you go. Awesome. So just take note of that. Whenever you have arguments, you have to wrap it in an arrow function like this. So computed properties are similar to methods, but they are computed using other state in your component. So usually they don't take any arguments and they always return something. So let's go ahead and make use of computed properties here. So it's called computed, and it's an object. And let's make one called message computed. This is a dumb example, but just to show you what I mean, we're going to return just the message from our state. And let's just append something onto that. Let's say computed. And to use that, you would just refer to it like any state in our component. So similar to this, we can just duplicate that and say message computed. Sorry, this should be this.message. Save that. And there you go. There's the computed property. So in React, there is no computed properties. So you would just use a method to do the same thing. So let's just do that over here. Let's do message computed. So same thing, no arguments, but it returns something. Return this.state.message plus computed. And now we would do this.message computed, but now we do want it to invoke. So we put these braces around it, and that should show, just like a computer property. There we go. Cool. Okay, let's talk about lifecycle hooks. And again, let's start with Vue. So there are a handful of lifecycle hooks that get invoked at different stages when the component is made. So for example, there's one called mounted, and let's just console log this. Mounted. And if you save that, again, not sure why that's not working, but there it is there. So in React, it's pretty much the same thing, except it's named differently. So it's named component did mount, and we can do the same thing. Mounted. Save that. Oops, sorry, not this. Just normally like that. Sorry, I keep putting it in the wrong place. Should be outside the render function. And if we open up the console, there it is right there. Cool. Okay, now let's talk about props, and let's start with Vue. So to pass data around between components, we make use of props. So in Vue, you pass props like this. Actually, if you look at the root component, you'll see that a prop is being passed into the child hello world component like this. So in the component that props are being passed to, you have to accept props like this. There's other ways of accepting props. The most loose way is to just have an array of the props that it's expecting. So in this case, it would just be like this. This way is more specific, and it specifies the type it's expecting. And to be even more explicit, you can do something like this and do type string. You can even say is required true. Sorry, it's not is required. Mixing that up with React, it's required. And you can also give it a default value if a prop is not passed in. So let's call it default value. So let's not make it required. Just comment that out. And sorry, forgot a semicolon here. And I forgot to close this. Okay. And if we go back to our parent component, and if we don't specify the prop, since we have that default value, there it is right there. Cool. So let's just put that back. Also in Vue, you can't mutate props directly. So if you need to mutate props, you have to set it as a state in your component, and then you can mutate the state. So in React, it pretty much works the same way. So let's go ahead and pass a prop from app.js into our child component here. So right here, let's do msg equals I am a prop. And then in our component down here, instead of hello world, we can just do this dot props dot the prop that we passed in. And there you go. You see, I am a prop here. So as you can see in React, you don't have to specify the props that are being accepted. However, you should, as it makes things more explicit and makes your code more readable if someone else is looking at it. So to validate props, it used to be built into React, but now you have to use a package, an official package. So we have to npm install prop types. Okay, that's done. So now we have to import it. So let's paste it in. So import prop types from prop types. And to use this, so you specify the component name. So hello world dot prop types equals an object. And here is where you validate your props coming in. So for our case, prop types, we want it to be a string. So you can see there's different types here, number, object. In our case, it's just a string. And if you want, you can set is required here, but let's not make it required. So let's save that. That should still work, and it does. And if you want to set a default value, you have to do hello world dot default props equals, and you do the same thing, and I am the default. So now if we don't pass a prop in, then the default should show. So if we just take this out, default, there you go, cool. Just put that back. Okay, now let's talk about list rendering, and let's start with Vue. So let's go ahead and make some new state, and I'm going to paste it in, and it's just a list of to-dos, and each to-do is an object that has a title with a to-do and just a boolean to specify if that task is done or not. So true, false, true, false. So now if we want to render this, we would make use of a directive. So up here, let's put it right under here. So let's make a div and make a span in here. So we're going to use the v4 directive, which just iterates over a list, in our case an array. And for to do in our to-dos array, and make sure you specify a key. So in our case, we're just going to use the index, but usually you should use some property on the to-do. If there was an ID on the to-do, you can definitely use that, but we don't, so we'll just specify an index. So to get the index, you just wrap it in brackets like this, and all we have to do is just give it the double curly, and we just want to render out the title, and that's it. Save that, and there it is. There is our array being rendered out. So in React, let's go ahead and put the state in our state over here. So I'm just going to paste that in. And in React, there is no directives. So we would just make use of a normal JavaScript. So let me show you how to do that. Let's do the same thing. Let's make a div. And let's put a span in here. And here's how we render it. We can make use of the map function. So this dot state dot to-dos dot map, and we'll take in the to-do. We'll do an arrow function, and down here we'll close that. And within the span, we can just do to-do dot title. So very similar. And there is that list rendered out right there. Cool. Ninja edit from the future. If you look at the console, you'll see a warning here saying that we should have a key for our map here. So definitely specify it in here. I'm going to use the index. So to do dot index, sorry, not to do dot index, just index. And we will specify that index in here. So to do index, and we have to wrap this in brackets. And that should work. Okay, cool. Okay, let's take a look at conditional rendering. And again, let's start with Vue. So say we only wanted to render out the ones that are completed. So all we have to do is just make use of another directive called vif, and we just give it the condition we want to render it. So to do dot finished, and this will only render out the ones that are finished. So in this case, learn view and finish screencast. If you look at the data, learn view and finish screencasts are the ones that are completed. If you want the else case, we can do that as well. And we don't have a condition because it's just the other case. And we can just append something here. Let's just say not complete. And there you go. Cool. So in React, there are several ways to do this, but the way I like to use it is using inline conditionals. So to do that, same case. So if we only want to show the ones that are completed, we do something like this. So to do dot finished, and we make use of short circuiting. Oops. So you just use the double and this will only render out if this condition is true. So let's go ahead and save that. And there you go. It only renders out the ones that are finished. So if you want the else case, I personally like just to do it like this and just to flip the Boolean, because this is easier to read than a ternary expression, which is what I'm about to show you. So let me just comment this out and show you that the other ones now show. But if you want to use a ternary, you can do that as well. Let me comment this out. And to do a ternary, again, it's just JavaScript. So we would do to do dot finished question mark, and now you wrap it in brackets, span. Okay, that doesn't work. Span. So to do title. And the other case, again, wrap it in brackets. And just copy this. And we'll just do not completed. And that should work. So there you go. Again, this to me is not as readable as just doing it the other way, but you can use whatever you like. Okay, let's take a look at conditional class rendering. So let me just bring this back to where it renders out everything. And let me just take this out and take the v-else out. Okay, so say we wanted to render the completed ones to be green and the incompleted ones to be red. So first let's make some CSS. So I'll just put it in here. Let's make one called red, color red. Let's make one called green, color green. And let's just see if that works. So class equals green. Okay, and red. Cool. So we want this class to render out a different class name based on a condition. So to do that in Vue, we have a very handy way of doing that. So we have to bind class, and then we have to give it an object. So we want it to be green if to do dot finished, and we want it to be red if to do not finished, and that's it. Sorry, finished. There you go. So we have it rendering based on a condition. So in React, let me just bring this back. Just copy this and comment this out and bring it back. Okay, so let me just specify the CSS. So app.css, again, .red, color red, green, color green. And again, you can make use of whatever CSS way that we discussed earlier, but I'll just do it this traditional way. Back to app. And let me just see if those work. I forgot to mention that in JSX and in React, you can't use class. You have to use class name. So let's just see if red works. Okay, so it does. Cool. So we can just do a ternary here. So to do dot finished, we can specify green, and if it's not finished, then red. That should work, and it does. If you like the way it's done in Vue, there is a library called class names, which is pretty much the same way Vue does it. And we'll just use a syntax like this. So go ahead and pull that in if you like the other way. So I'm quickly just going to go over some other points which I can't show code because this video would take forever. So the first point is state management. So in Vue, there is an official state management library called Vuex. Now Vuex takes the best parts of all the Flux-like architectures like Redux and makes it pretty straightforward. Although it is possible to use other libraries, I personally see the majority of Vue developers using Vuex whenever state management is needed. I see a lot of people holding out on using Vuex because for some reason people think it's complicated, but once you actually look at it, it's not very complicated. And once you understand it, you'll find yourself using it whenever you have a medium to large size application. So in React, state management can be handled in different ways. The most popular is definitely using a library called Redux. Other options include MobX, MobX State Tree, or more recently, just using React's native context API to handle state. So when I was learning React, I already knew the concept of state management because I already learned Vuex in Vue. So I started to learn Redux because that was the go-to for state management in React. And it was going well and I understood it, but the amount of boilerplate needed to set everything up was a bit much for my taste. So I started researching MobX. MobX, in my opinion, is much simpler to set up and doesn't follow React's principles 100%. For example, you can actually mutate state, and there is also the idea of computer properties. So in a way, it kind of feels more like Vuex, so that's probably why I liked it better. So when it comes to mobile frameworks using web technologies, for Vue, we have a few options, including Vue, NativeScript Vue, Vue Native, and other ones like Ionic, Weeks. And I actually have videos for NativeScript Vue and Vue Native if you're curious as to how those work. And for React, we have React Native. Now, in my opinion, React Native is the best option out there. The Vue options are still great, but the amount of information available is not scarce, but it's nowhere near as much that is available for React Native. And for me personally, I pretty much work by myself and I need as much help as I can get. So I went with React Native and I have no doubts in using it. I think it's the most mature out of all these mobile frameworks using web technologies, although the other ones are getting more mature. And Flutter by Google just came out, and I think that will maybe not catch up, but it's growing pretty rapidly. So there you have it, guys. I hope this was a good overview of the similarities and differences between React and Vue. Now, if you were to ask me which one I prefer, I would definitely say Vue.js. I'm a huge fan of its expressive and readable syntax and how it makes things very easy to do with less code. With that being said, I still really enjoy using React as well. If you can find the time, I really encourage you to learn both. For example, I only recently learned React and it was pretty straightforward coming from Vue. And if you're a React developer, I think it's actually easier to learn Vue once you know React. So learning React has definitely made me a better JavaScript developer, as some of its concepts are not really enforced heavily in Vue. For example, immutability and the functional approach. Also, now that I'm comfortable with React, I feel like I'm more in tune with the web development / JavaScript community. Like when I'm reading through the news on Twitter, say, and something React related comes up, prior to knowing React, I sort of felt left out because I didn't understand the syntax. But now that I do know React, I feel like I'm a part of both communities. Anyways, I think I'll end it here as I can probably go on and on about this topic. I hope you learned something, and I hope you learn and continue to use both React and Vue. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one. Okay, thanks. Bye.